Two of the most common ways split squats are performed is with a more vertically oriented torso or with a torso that's more pitched forward. But why would you do one versus the other? Are we just doing this for variety's sake? Are we just doing this because we want to induce muscle confusion? No. In fact, with each of these exercises, there are key biomechanical differences between them. And depending on what your movement needs are, one could be better for you than the other, or one could be worse for you than the other. What are those differences? That's what we're going to get into. In this video, I'm going to go over the differences between a vertical torso split squat and a horizontal or superhero split squat, when you would program one versus the other, and most importantly, how to coach and perform them so you can maximize your mobility and fitness gains. First, we have to go into what generally happens biomechanically during a split squat. If my lead leg is the left leg, I'm going to start with the sacrum facing away from the lead leg. Then, as I descend into a deeper split squat, you're going to notice that the sacrum and the pelvis are going to start to turn towards the front leg. There's different rotational elements that happen when this occurs. According to this study here by Don Newman, in the earlier ranges of hip flexion, about 0 to 60 degrees, there's more of an external rotation bias in the femur, and that will subsequently also occur in the pelvis. Conversely, as I approach 90 to 100 degrees of hip flexion, the line of pull of the posterior rotators of the hip, the piriformis, obturator muscles, stuff like that, those change their rotational bias towards more internal rotation. So in the early ranges of hip flexion in a split squat, there's greater external rotation demands. And in the later ranges of the split squat, there's greater internal rotation demands. Now, how does trunk position influence those rotational biases? According to this study right here, the more vertical I keep my torso, the greater load that I have in the quads. The more horizontal or more pitched forward my torso is, the greater the load distribution is into the hamstrings. But why is that? It has to deal with how the pelvic floor and sacral dynamics change when I stay more vertically oriented or when I pitch my torso forward. If I'm staying more vertically oriented, what you're going to have is the sacrum, this big bone right here. It's going to tip more backwards. This is called sacral counternutation. When you perform sacral counternutation, the back of the pelvic floor increases its muscle activity. It becomes more concentric. When that happens, the acetabulum, these are the holes that your femurs sit in, they orient more outward. So it allows me to have more external rotation. Therefore, if I keep the pelvis more vertical, it increases the amount of external rotation that's going to occur with a split squat. Conversely, if I pitch my torso forward, the sacrum is going to also tip forward. This is called sacral nutation. When this happens, now the back of the pelvic floor becomes more elongated or eccentric. That also changes the acetabular orientation. It's going to point these things more inward. So it's going to allow for increased internal rotation range of motion. Therefore, when I tip the torso forward, the internal rotation demands are increased, and that will shift the load distribution more to the back of the legs, aka the hamstrings, probably the glutes. So does that mean that horizontal split squats are good and vertical split squats are bad? No, it just depends on what you're going for. Let's say that I'm trying to gain range of motion with a split squat. Well, if I need more external rotation, I might stay more vertical and I might keep the depth higher. Conversely, if I need more internal rotation, I might pitch the torso forward and if I can, drive greater depth in the split squat. But you could also look at this from a loading perspective, because guess what? When you're lifting super heavy weights in a split squat, it's not the best tool for range of motion gains, but it could be a useful strategy to increase force production. If I'm someone who has an easier time squatting and I have greater external rotation available, I might want to choose a more vertically oriented split squat to allow me to load with less chance of using some type of undesirable movement strategy. Conversely, if I have a fair amount of internal rotation range of motion, A pitch forward split squat might be a better choice because I have more space available to move into. That's going to minimize me doing anything counterproductive while I'm loading heavy. But folks, I don't care piddly diddly about any of that biomechanics if you can't coach these movements or perform them to the best of your capabilities. So we got to go into how to do that next. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have Chris stand about 1.5 foot length away between each of his feet. He wants to keep his eyes looking towards the horizon. Now I want both knees soft. You want to make sure that you're starting with the front leg in either more of like a neutral shin angle or even slightly a little bit back. So Chris, you might actually take a bigger step back and then shift back. Yeah, like right there is where I want the starting point. Now the first thing that we're going to go after is making sure we have ab, lower rib cage position. This is going to help Chris stay vertical as he goes up and down. So I want the arms to go forward. You're going to go silent nasal inhale, soft exhale, arms forward, body backwards, so you feel the abs, lower ribs kicking in. Now from here, imagine that you're in a phone booth. You're going to take a silent inhale, go slowly down, take a knee, right about there, exhale, come up. So I'm keeping the depth a little bit high for Chris intentionally, and there's a reason for that. When you see him go really low, you'll notice that the leg goes forward, the back leg, and then from the other view, you're going to see that his right knee is going to sweep out. That's because when you're doing a split squat, the pelvis has to turn a little bit towards the front leg. So if I do the move right here, you'll see I don't get that as much. And that's because I just got a little bit more mobility in this particular case. So when you see that, there's a couple options that you can do. One, you can shorten the depth just like that. The other option is we can elevate the front foot because it will reduce the loading into that side. So if we go with the same setup, go just a little bit longer stance. Arms are going to be forward, eyes looking to the horizon. Get your silent in, exhale, and then just slowly drop down in the phone booth. So you don't want to go as low with the front foot elevation, but you'll see from the side view right here, he's getting less of that sweep until about that point. So we can actually get a little bit more depth without having to make any other tweaks to the movement. Now we're going to work on the hinged version of the split squat, or as I like to call, the superhero split squat. Here's the setup for that. Now I start this one with both feet symmetrical, just like so. And you're going to start with the hinge first. And so on this, the cue that I'm going to have Chris do is you're still going to look to the horizon. Arms are going to go out in front, just like we did with the first version. Soft knees at the start. You want to go silent in through the nose. As you do the exhale and the reach, you want to think arms forward, but then hips go back like you're opening a door with your rear. Perfect. That's good. That was a really solid hinge. If you have someone who has a difficult time being able to get the hips to come back, a common cheat that you'll see is as they exhale and they reach, they'll end up straightening the knees and the hips won't go back. And so then you notice that Chris is getting a little bit more back activity. He's got a lot more forward trunk pitch. That's going to limit the amount that the hips are going to be loaded. It's going to shift more load to the back, which we don't want that with the split squat. So we want soft knees, eyes looking to the horizon. You're going to do your exhale, arms forward, hips backwards. Right about there. Now from here, I'm going to keep that arm position. Chris is going to keep one knee bent and slide it back about the same distance as we did with the first split squat. And then it's the same cues. You're going to take a silent inhale, take a knee. You're going to keep your depth pretty high, right about there. Exhale, come back up. And a lot of times what I will cue people to do is imagine their rear's on a wall. You're sliding your rear up and down the wall, just like that. So a lot of times if people go too low and they lack adequate motion, what you'll see is they'll lose that hinged posture. It'll end up making it a lot more vertical. And that's because they can't access the back of the hip motion, so they change their body orientation to be able to do that. Go ahead and demonstrate that again. So you'll see here Chris goes more upright, and then he'll go into the hinge posture. So really the big key is you want to just limit the depth. But another way that you could do it to make it easier is by elevating the front foot. So we can do the same song and dance here. Cues are exactly the same. I'm going to have Chris exhale, reach, get the hips back, keep the back knee bent. This is another issue that you'll oftentimes see with this move. And then it's the same thing. Inhale down, exhale up. And there you have it, folks. That's the difference between a more vertically oriented split squat and a split squat with a forward lean, aka the superhero split squat. Now, if you want a more in-depth video on how to coach the superhero split squat, I strongly encourage you to check out this one right here, where I go into all the nitty-gritty details and some common cues you can use to get the most out of that exercise.